Okay, I'm here with Michael Gough, and he has done a couple of talks on ransomware. He went to B-Sides Austin, and I was there, and he said, okay, how many of you want me to do my incident response talk versus how many people want to do my ransomware talk? And like 90% of the people in the audience wanted to hear about ransomware, which was surprising to you. Why?
Well, because we don't have a lot of problems with ransomware, and I think there's been enough talk about certain things you can do, and maybe you've gone out and drank the EDR next-gen AV Kool-Aid and bought something to improve it. There's been enough cases where I think people have taken some action. I know we have, and it turns out the reality that's not the case. People still obviously are having a problem with ransomware, which we'll talk about what happened when I gave the next ransomware talk, which was interesting.
At Rocky Mountain InfoSec Con.
Yep.
Right. So you did those two talks, and like the day you did the Rocky Mountain Con, that's when this big WannaCry came out, right? That day. And you just happened to be doing a ransomware talk at the con.
Yeah, the timing of that is pretty interesting. So I'm at B-Sides, Denver the next day, and everybody's talking about the impact of that, and people are scrambling a lot of cases, checking in, watching their emails, and I'm like, yeah, I got nothing. And everybody started asking me, how do you have nothing? Well, you should have gone to my talks. So from my perspective, it surprises me that people haven't done some of these very basic things still, because they're free. You don't have to buy anything.
So, very basic things. Let's talk about, where do we start? The infection vector itself. How do you get or how do most people get ransomware to begin with?
Well, like in my talk, I talk about I discuss where the vectors coming in of ransomware. Most ransomware that people see is via email. Right? Most malware people see is coming in via email, right? Most even targeted attacks, APT, they're targeting phishing, spear phishing, water coolering your company. And so email attachments are the way that the majority of ransomware comes into a company. And the user is your infector. They double-click the attachment in the email.
All right. So let's talk about the progression that you did at your company when ransomware started to become a problem. Which was a couple years ago, you started seeing this become a new thing, and then what'd you do at first?
Well, obviously several years ago, like more than several, like probably 3-4 years ago, ransomware started hitting the radar, and occasional here, occasional there. But about 2 years ago, suddenly it got a little more organized, and we started seeing regular campaigns, if not weekly, for sure monthly, where 1, 5, 15, sometimes 30, 50, even up to 100 start occurring. And in a 2-year period, we saw a very noticeable increase where the graph was probably going up at a 30-degree angle, or maybe even looking like a very wide bell curve. And it was very noticeable that if we didn't do something or make some changes, that the quantities that we were going to receive was going to go off the charts. Now, we had obviously analyzed malware in the lab, so we kind of saw what the makeup of these ransomware were, what kind of attachments they were sending us, what kind of things happened when you initially detonated them before the ransomware, and that gave us enough information to make some determinations for changes to our email gateway.
All right, so how did you determine what changes were supposed to take place? You just looked at what was coming, and then what kind of infrastructure you had, and see how you can, block, right? What kind of emails they were based on analytics?
Well, it turned out as we analyzed these in the lab, there was a pattern, and the pattern was what was the default behavior in Windows when a user double-clicked these. They're all JavaScript or some sort of scripting attachment, so JS, JSE, WSF, WSH, HTA. So these have automatic executions in Windows, and so they were taking advantage of the fact that a user will double-click this attachment and it will detonate. It's not like a Word doc opens Word, which is how these usually come in sometimes. And instead, these things just .js, you double-click a .js, boom, scripting host kicks in and infection starts. And that's how most of these. So we saw that these attachments, and then by looking in Windows to say, well, who else has this kind of capability? It's a short list. HTA, WSF, WSH, JSE, JS, VBE, and VBS. And that handful of stuff we then created a list and said, we want to block these at the email gateway. There's no reason our company should receive these file attachments.
Okay, so you looked at the attachments that had been coming in, which ones were valid and which ones weren't, and you got like 0 being valid. Is that what you're trying to say?
That's what I'm trying to say. Now, keep in mind, a legitimate use for these kinds of scripting languages or these scripts do exist, but you can inform your users, especially if they're being blocked email-wise, put them in a zip file and password protect them. So it's a pretty easy educational thing, saying, "Hey, I can't send you a VB script or a payload that might detonate." Well, gee, go figure. Even Google this year blocked JS and JSE scripting as a dangerous mechanism. So even they understand that this stuff should be blocked. But we did it last year, so we're way ahead of Google.
Yeah, and EXEs too. Google doesn't allow straight up executables, which I'm hoping that most gateways don't allow that as well, like email servers.
Well, I think we shouldn't assume anymore. I think the point of this podcast would be to tell people, go check your email gateways and find out or test. I recommend a Hover account. Go get a Hover email account. They don't check or block anything outbound, which means you can send an EXE, a VB script, malware, whatever the heck you want, in a zip file without a password, and Hover will send it out. So it's a great test mechanism. So test your email gateway. What kind of attachments does your organization allow?
Yeah, and they need to be tested from the outside. Don't go internally and send yourself or a colleague something, because that won't hit your gateway.
No, that's just going to go exchange to exchange.
Yeah. All right. So blocking malicious attachments or potentially malicious attachments. And the use case for those would be mostly developers, right? And they're smart enough to figure out, oh, this was blocked. I need to change my method of sending things, right?
Yeah. We all know.
Go figure.
Yeah, we all know that in the course of sending each other batch files, we don't send the .cmd or .bat file. We copy what's in that, paste it in the body of the email message, and then boom, send it away. So developers are smart enough, engineers are smart enough to figure out how to fix this problem. But malwareans are going after the typical user, which is nothing more than the infamous double click that Windows is so prominent for.
Okay, so what was the next iteration that the malwareans did? You started blocking these files, and apparently they started noticing, right? Your level of hits on JS, JSE, WSF went down.
Yeah, shockingly, there was another thing that occurred before that. If you remember, we also implemented the scanning of Word docs. So once you block these file types, they will change their MO and send you different file types. They'll put the scripts inside of something like a Word doc or a PDF.
You sound like you're being targeted, though.
I think
they actually are conscious of. They don't just spray and pray. They actually know that you're blocking these.
So I've said this at my talk, said this in Austin, said this at Rocky Mountain InfoSec Con, and somebody from the DoD did walk up to me after my talk. He says, "I can't tell you anything more, but your assumption that your domain is being monitored, tracked, and/or there's analytics on it is correct." So that tells me that there is some success rate that these kits that they're doing on the internet, mass selling these ransomware kits and using that whole delivery mechanism, comes with it some analytics to say what kind of success rate occurs with various domain names. And we saw after about 5 months of these blocks being in place, we were receiving thousands a month, and by the end of last year and up to today, which is June, we've received 0, and I mean 0. Well, I take that back. We received 1 because we didn't believe it, so we had to test it. And I sent us an email to say, "Yep, I got it. That the block is working," because we get copied. I get copied on these emails as they come in. So that's a good thing to test the fact that your blocks are working. But yes, we got 0.
Yeah. So what you did in the gateway was, not only did you block these from going to the user, but you sent yourself a copy.
Correct.
So that you could look at them and see, well, is this really malware? Am I blocking the wrong things? Is it actually working?
Yes.
Right.
When we first turned this on, we were getting maybe hundreds a week. By the time we were done, that months, we were getting thousands a month. Now, we, of course, just have to sample these, but we're also looking for what are they changing? Did they change anything in the scripts that they're sending us? Did some unique thing? The answer was basically no, and then, of course, it died, so there was no need to review them anymore, and now we don't get copied on anything. But what we do see now is Word docs with password-protected files. Inside that, VB script.
Now, see, we predicted that, right?
We did predict
predicted the next iteration would be documents that are encrypted and the password is in the body of the email.
Yep.
And that actually took place once the blocks of the JSE and also the malicious Word docs were being blocked at the gateway. All of a sudden, these encrypted documents started coming. So what did we do then?
Yeah, we got hundreds of Word docs with macros. We no longer receive Word docs with macros because we dropped those. And that's the cool thing. So they've, through analytics, I assume, have realized, well, those don't work. Let's send this type of document, which will work. Why? Password protection gets by AV, it gets by your sandboxes, it gets by your advanced malware solutions, your last lines of the world, your Cisco AMPs, your FireEyes, and all that, because it can't inspect a document that has a password on it.
Okay, so they started sending these, which is less than ideal because it involves the user doing a series of things to actually infect themselves. They have to open the doc, they have to take the password out of the body, enter the password, and then they have to click on the alloy object inside the Word doc. So that's a 3-step process that gives the users a lot of opportunity to say, wait a minute, this doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
So it's less than ideal, but it's the only way to actually get anyone within the company through email infected, right? So they had to resort to this method. And so what did you do? You put in the header or in the subject of the message in the gateway, warning unable to scan. So that was another indicator, right? Of, you may want to think twice before opening this. All right, so that was the next iteration.
Well, the other iteration we saw, we don't see, which kind of surprised me, is Word docs that are password protected, but we're still not seeing macros. So I think somewhere along the line between them switching from macro files to OLE objects, they basically, I think, assumed or concluded that we are blocking with the new Office 2016 and then downward ported macro disabling in Office 2013, that we had enabled that because we just don't see that anymore, where we used to get 10, 20, 100 docs a month. So I think they made two assumptions. Scripts aren't allowed, macros aren't allowed. We're sending you Word docs password protected with OLE objects. Good luck with that one. And that's where we're at today.
All right. So that's the whole progression. Now, did you do anything further? I mean, that sounds pretty good. You're still getting, anything encrypted as an attachment, you get sent a copy to you, right? So you can inspect.
Correct.
And of course, that only takes a couple of seconds. You look at the message for like 1 or 2 seconds, and you're like, oh, this is okay, or oh crap, this is a phishing email.
Yeah, they're usually pretty obvious just by looking at the way the message is crafted. They're short, there's not a lot of text in them, the password is somehow obfuscated, they use code, they use phrase, they use all kinds of things to get by those spam filters and outbreak filters.
Yep.
Unlike a real complex email that has all kinds of fancy stuff in there, these things are short, sweet, to the point, and just, basically so the user doesn't think, just open.
Yeah,
Which
and they usually say like invoice or
Yeah.
hey, it's urgent or something like that. All right, so what did you do next to try and prevent the 3-step process of actually getting infected?
Well, like you said, we predicted this ahead of time because we saw this transition of lots of scripts, lots of Word docs with macros, and occasionally these Word docs with OLE objects. And whether they're testing it or whatnot, who knows at that point. But in the course of looking at those, we looked at them and said, well, when you double-click this, it launches the thing. Wait a minute. We could change the way the double-click behavior, deny the double-click behavior, and suddenly the user would now not infect themselves. So we realized that if we change a file association on the malicious script types, because keep in mind, right, we blocked the raw script coming in, but they can send you a zip file with it. They can send you a Word doc, a PDF. They can send you a link to a Dropbox. We've seen that. Or a Google Drive. We've seen those as well, where the link then downloads the Word doc, which inside that has OLE object, or downloads the JS script that says employment form or invoice, and the user would then double-click it. So however they can get by your defenses, which they can, there's lots of methods and options, we noticed that it was still the user double-clicking that was the infection point, and that we could actually alter the file association for these malicious types instead of automatically doing the host engine, script engine execution, we would just go ahead and say, well, why don't we just open this in Notepad? And now suddenly these things don't detonate.
Yeah, but that affects developers, right?
Developers know how to fix this, and they're not double-clicking VB scripts. They're going to open them in an editor and do their thing and test them at the command line with the proper way of doing scripting and not double-clicking them in the desktop.
Okay, so in order to change the file association, that's what? One command, right?
You can use the assoc command on the command line, or within the GUI, default programs, change file type associations, find your scripted host. There's 6 entries for that, and then, of course, be sure to add your HTA to get rid of the HTML automatic execution, and change those all to Notepad, boom, done.
So even in Word, when you, if there's an Olay object in Word, looks like a little icon, user clicks that, it gives them a warning that says, hey, do you want to open this VBS? You say yes, user says yes, and then what happens? If the file association is Notepad, it pops up Notepad?
Pops up Notepad, and you're looking at this very weird obfuscated script, which a user would be able to say is immediately weird because they can't read it. Because these guys, one of the things they do is make the script completely hard to read.
So they can't possibly get themselves infected at that point?
Not unless they want to drop the file to the command line and do it the old-fashioned way, and pretty much only the developers, and they know better. Or security people that do it on purpose.
Right. Okay, so then it wouldn't be possible for a user to infect themselves unless they knew how to execute a script via the command line.
Yeah, they'd have to engineer it. They'd have to go out of their way, really out of their way, to infect themselves.
And what percentage of malware could this prevent? Ransomware.
Oh, well, in our case, in 6 months, 100.
When was the last time you had
Knock on wood.
When was the last time you had someone get ransomware in your environment?
December, but that came from external email source. So it was actually because somebody went to their email, Gmail, I believe it was, and they opened a document within that on their work laptop. It wasn't because it came in through our organization. So we've not seen a ransomware internally since we enabled these things back in a year ago.
So seven months for that one in an entire year.
Where these rules applied, we've not had any in a year. We have as you know, we have this place, a weird cluster of servers that's used for a specialty item. They got it, but then we applied these rules to that, and now they don't get them either. So the only ones we've gotten is people that have gotten outside our company on their work laptops doing something they weren't supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
And the file associations, as they get pushed out, would break that.
All right. So there you go, folks. No ransomware in a year, knock on wood. Yes, knock on the old head, noggin. Anything else? Deny the double click and, deny scripting at the gateway and give yourself a copy of malware so that you can go play around with LogMD and see what these new techniques are, right?
Right. People see this. We tell them, save a file, send it to us, we'll play with it in the lab. The other important part is do this to your mom, your dad, grandma, grandpa, your kids, your wife, small business computers that you know. These people will never notice you made this change. We've done it to my chiropractor. And they can double-click these accidentally now. And if you see a bunch of gibberish in notepads, what I told them, next time I'm in, you can tell me and I'll look at it. And so it really is a simple fix for SMBs, which don't have to buy a $100,000 EDR or an Next-Gen AV or do anything funky. This is through GPO if you're a bigger company. Easily done.
Works with all file-based malware. Huh?
All file-based malware. Maybe even fileless, because I think VB script tends to be in those. You can even break PowerShell. You can break PowerShell from launching PowerShell ISE too. Make it open in Notepad.
Wow. Okay. That's it. Tune in next time for another episode of Breaking Down Security. Bye-bye.